Today we are going to talk about year-end closing. If you've seen one of these before, it's pretty much some of the same slides, but it's always good to review it and do it again. And if this is new to you, it's going to be new. All right, I'm going to get started with some starting slides. I'm going to turn off my camera. Actually, I'm going to leave it on for a little bit. All right, so we're going to talk about year-end closing, how to make year-end closing in GP simple and painless. That is our goal. As you may know, we're Innovative Cloud Solutions. We call ourselves ICS. We were established in 1996. We have offices in Buffalo, Richmond, and Orlando. Whole bunch of clients. Microsoft Dynamics GP is the solution that I work with primarily, but we do actually also support two other ERPs. We support Microsoft Business Central, which is a cloud-based software, and Acumatica, which is another cloud-based software. So both of those are softwares that we rep. And I am Devin Southall. I have been doing this for over 18 years. I come from what we call the North Office, which used to be Software Solutions Group. I work out of Buffalo, New York, and have been doing this for 18 years now. So just a little bit of time. I mostly worked in accounting and small business. I mostly work on the distribution and manufacturing modules. So if I haven't talked to you guys, it's probably because you're in core. But alrighty, I'm going to turn the camera off for a little while. That helps me focus. Otherwise, I get distracted by myself. All right, so let's get started. This is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about creating a new fiscal year because that's super important. We're going to talk about the different year-end closes for modules, receivables, payables, tax, inventory, and fixed assets. And then we're going to talk about the financial year-end close, which is the biggie. And then we're going to touch on payables 1099 printing. We will take questions at the end. So feel free to put questions in the questions on the GoToMeeting. We'll cycle back to those at the end if anyone has any questions. We'll take those at the end. All right. So if your fiscal year is not calendar, meaning you don't go from January to December, you're going to have to actually do two close processes. So I'm not going to talk about this the rest of the session. I'm going to assume that your fiscal year is calendar year, but I do want to touch on it in the beginning just so that everyone is aware. On the calendar, so at December 31st, you will want to do sales, purchasing, and payroll. They have calendar closes. And then when your fiscal year end closes, whenever that is, you'll also want to do these. They have two different options, and then these other modules. And so that's if your fiscal year is not calendar. The rest of the session, I am going to make the assumption that your fiscal year is calendar, that your fiscal year is going to end on December 31st, okay? Beautiful. I'm just going to pause there. Does anyone have any questions? Ping now on that, and we're going to go on if you don't. I see nothing in the chat, so I am going to assume that that is no questions. Beautiful. All right. So the first thing I want to do is show a demo on how to create a new fiscal year because let's be honest, this is confusing. And we have one or two customers every single year who screw this up. I think somebody did it earlier this week. So we've already got at least one. So I am going into Microsoft Dynamics GP. This is Microsoft Dynamics GP. I think this is 2015, but it's identical. So we're going to go to the fiscal period screen. There's a couple different ways to go. I like to go Microsoft Dynamics GP, Tools, Setup, Company, Fiscal Periods. You can also get it from Administration down here. But we're going to go Fiscal Periods here. So when this screen comes up, you go to the very bottom and validate what years have already been created. So I have in this test company 2028 created and 2029 created. So obviously wouldn't need to start a new one right now. But I'm going to create 2030. Here's the confusing part. You type in this dropdown. I don't know of another dropdown in GP we type in. So that's the super confusing part. You type in the dropdown, you hit tab, You make sure these days are right. If these days aren't right, you've screwed up. You didn't do the next year. If these days are right and these are your periods, which typically it is, you press calculate. And then you press OK. Generally, I would suggest closing it, but that's your steps for creating a year. It is super confusing. I have those same steps here in our PowerPoint. So type the year in the drop-down field. Make sure that this is right. Enter your number of periods. Press calculate. Make sure it's correct. You can change your period names if you want to, and then you press OK when done. Again, I'm going to pause right at that section and make sure that no one has any questions, just to double check, because again, that is also super confusing. All right. No questions is no questions. I'm going to assume that we are good. All right, beautiful. So that's how to create a fiscal year. Next up, let us talk about, if I haven't closed my year, can I do transactions in 2024? Yes. So even before you close, you can do transactions in 2024. Our little exception is payroll and fixed asset, which we'll talk about. So that goes to the timing of when we're going to do the closes. Transactions are not close specific. So in January, even if you haven't done closes, you can do 2024 transactions. And in 2023, if you need to do some January transactions, you're more than willing to. So that's important. All right, will history be deleted when I do my closes? No, as long as the maintain history checkboxes are selected. So before you close, it's always good practice to double check that your maintain history checkboxes are selected. Some of these are simple for modules, so that's general ledger, bank reconciliation, and payroll. And you go to the module setup and double check that these maintain history checkboxes are checked. Some of those are on each individual customer, vendor, item, and tax. For these, feel free to contact support and they can look in SQL, or you can run a smart list to add those fields. And again, always email support if you've got any concerns. So during the close, you should not be losing any history as long as you have your maintain history checkboxes selected. Okay. All right. Overall warnings that we give users. Okay. Before doing any year-end close or anything in GP under routines. So here I am in GP. Anything I find under routines, which is year-end closing, we have these particular warnings that we want you to cover. Get all users out of GP and all related programs. Back up the database. And we're going to talk about archiving some databases, which we'll talk about when we get into the financial year-end close, but we also recommend backing up Dynamics database. Run your close routine and only let users back in if the process was successful. If the process wasn't successful, sorry, you should call support right away. That's where that backup is coming on. So if you don't have IT that can help you with the backup, that's where we can help you. Just let us know, okay? So that's super important. And that goes to really anything under routines or utilities, is that you should do the backups. All right. Year-end close is a fabulous time to talk about some housekeeping. So because we've got to get those users out, maybe we should do some other things. There are some GP routines that move things to history, like paid transaction removal, badly named. It doesn't remove it, it just moves it to history, and that's in receivables. And also remove completed purchase orders. Also, it moves it to history, it doesn't actually remove them. So both of these routines, we often recommend that you involve us. We can have scripts to check before, and we can do these routines for you. Side note, there is something under routines called period consolidation. We strongly discourage using that. It actually removes your financial details and makes it hard to recover from other problems. So we always want to note if there's something we don't want you to use. All right. More housekeeping. Should I run the GP utilities for check links or reconciles? So this is where, in the 18 years I've been doing this, Microsoft's advice has changed dramatically. In the beginning, Microsoft was like, run check links, run reconcile, and they really much recommended that for everything all the time. But now we're really only recommending to run check links and reconciles when you have a specific data issue, and only run the ones related to the problem you're having. And the Microsoft recommendation is to try it in a test company first. These routines make changes and you can't undo those. And so you want to check it very carefully. And so again, they can change financial data and permanently remove records, and not everything is listed. So use them with caution. I sometimes stumble across customers who the IT department is, oh yeah, I run check links every month. I'm like, really? Okay. It just gets me concerned. Okay, moving forward from there, let's talk about the module closes. So you may or may not be aware, but there are module closes in the system. We're going to talk about receivables, so accounts receivable, accounts payable, and tax. What do these module closes do? What they do is they reset various year-to-date fields to 0, and they move the year-to-date number to the prior year-to-date fields. And you can see these fields on some smart lists, some inquiry screens, and some summary reports. So if I come here into GP and I pop open my smart lists, and I pop open, say, I'll go to purchasing, I'll go to vendors, I'll hit columns here, and I see down here all these year-to-date, life-to-date fields. These are those summary numbers I'm talking about. The problem with these are that there's no perfect time to do this close to move that current year to prior year. Okay. And so if you look at the Microsoft instructions, if you look at the Microsoft instructions, they say finish 2023, run your close, run your reports, and then start 2024. But the software doesn't require you to do that. And so what we have is actually scripts to update these year-to-date for payables and receivables for you. And so we suggest customers do these AR and AP closes somewhere between December 30th and January 1st. And if they want these year-to-date numbers to be perfect, sometime in January, call support, we'll run the scripts and your numbers will be perfect. That's really our best recommendation. They're not critical. We have run into bunches of customers who have never run these closes and didn't notice it. It's just their year-to-date number contains all their history. And so what about 1099s? Because again, if you read the Microsoft instructions, it acts like you have to do 1099s as part of the close. They're completely independent. I don't know why Microsoft says this. You can run your 1099s before, after, whatever. We're going to talk about 1099s later. All right. Any questions on that before I get into the inventory module close? Just feel free to use the Reactor chat if you've got any questions. I just don't see any questions. I don't see any chat. I don't see any reactions. I'm saying you're all good. Cool. Okay. So the inventory year-end close is a little bit different. There's a couple options on this year-end close, and I always want to talk about them because some of the options, personally, I think is a little scary. All right, so the inventory year-end close also resets various year-to-date fields to 0 and moves the prior numbers. Unfortunately, we don't have magic scripts for this, but we do have magic scripts for the most important number, which is the quantities sold. Same thing, we recommend you do this between December and January, and if you want us to reset that quantity sold number, we can do that mid-January if you want. What's important on this year-end close is these checkboxes will remove data, not like the other ones that are badly named. They're gone. So if you check sold receipts, it's going to actually take that receipts history out of your system. In my opinion, data is cheap. Let's keep the data. We need it for good purposes. And so I never recommend anyone check those boxes. And again, like the other closes, if you've never closed inventory, It's not going to make any difference. There's just a couple reports that run funny, and obviously your year-to-date numbers are going to be everything. All right. Let's touch on fixed asset module close. It's a whole other beast. Okay? Fixed asset is a hard close module. You can only be in 1 year at a time. Your fixed end year-end close is run for one or more books, and it's a hard close. So you have to finish everything and run a whole bunch of reports before you can move on to the next year. We don't get into it here. There is a year-end knowledge base from Microsoft that has very specific detailed steps. We always recommend you follow those. And those links are going to be at the end of the presentation, which we're going to attach in here when we're done. So feel free to follow that if you use the fixed asset module. Now, we're going to get into the financial year-end close, which is the one you do have to do. So before I move on, I'm going to take another pause here, make sure anyone has any questions on the module closes. My summary to module closes are, they're optional. Kind of try to do them near year-end if you can, but if you don't, call support and we'll help you fix receivables and payables so that those year-to-date numbers are correct, if you care. And same with inventory on the quantities sold. So, but again, if you miss it or you've never done it, just don't use those year-to-date numbers. They're going to be junk. All right, I see no chat, no questions, no reactions. So I am moving on to the biggie, which is financial year-end close. So what does the financial year-end close do? It creates the beginning balance for your balance sheet accounts and then obviously rolls the balance into retained earnings. It also deletes unused inactive accounts if you check that. And it makes a hard close on the prior year. Oops, I've got my years wrong. So if we close 23, then you cannot make any more entries in 22. There we go. So when we're closing 23, this is making so that 22 is completely hard closed. Now, if you want to undo that, you can call support and they can undo that closed year for you. So we've gone back to prior years for people, but from a general user standpoint, you won't be able to make any more entries into 22, which means you still can do entries to 23 after you have closed that year. Important point. They do look a little funny when you make those prior year entries. They almost look like they double because it's doing that entry that you asked for and then it's doing that entry to those beginning balances. So we get a support call on those two each year. All right. Oh, here we go. Can you still make entries into the year after close? Yes, even in the subledger, as long as in your setup you have this posting to history checkbox. And here's my note about the entries look double. The entry repeats itself once for the date posted and again for the last day of the year. Okay. All right. When should you do your financial year-end closing? You can do it any time, but the best time is after your subledgers are complete for the year and after the bulk of your year-end entries are made. And because we don't want a whole bunch of entries to that beginning balance. This just makes your beginning balance entries cleaner. To the other side, before you need to write financial statements for the new year, because you can't really run good balance sheets for the prior year, for the current year until you have those beginning balances. So your P&Ls might be okay, but your balance sheets would be horrible. So most people close in mid-February when they need to get those January numbers done, and they're definitely done with December. We have people calling us in mid-January also. Okay. Any questions on that? Before we go to the next, which is actually the steps to do. Any questions? I see nothing. No chat. Beautiful. All right, cool. All right, so what are the steps for the year-end close? Our important close steps, first of all, is to check your account posting types. If your account types are set up wrong, then they're going to close wrong. So that's super important. Post all transactions. If you have an open journal entry, it's going to yell at you. It'll let you go, but it's always good to have them all posted. Get everyone out of GP. Can't close the year with people in GP. It's bad. And here's where we get techie. We need to have sufficient hard drive space on the GP server. How would you know this? That's a surprise. That's why a lot of clients actually have us close their years, because we can do the backup, we can check for space, we can make sure it works correctly. And we'd be welcome to, we'll talk about that at the year end or at the end of the presentation. Make backups and archive them. Why do we archive them? Well, we make the backup so that if it crashes, which it does occasionally, generally due to space constraints, but we have found crashes for other reasons, you can go back to those backups. Why do we want to archive them? The archive is sort of your protection. If we have this archive that's tucked to a side, if something happens during the year, we can go back to that and we have a snapshot of what your data looked at that point. Weird, crazy scenarios where we've used these. Client had an employee that mistakenly went into one of these utilities that does delete history and deleted all the vendor history for 2 years ago. Some of those crazy scenarios, because we had that archive snapshot, we were able to solve their problem and restore that data. There's been all sorts of scenarios. That's why we always recommend once a year to have that archive. Okay, moving on. Do not end task on your close, even if it says not responding. Right now, GP often says not responding because it's thinking, but Windows doesn't realize it's thinking because of the way the code's written. So never end task on your close. Call support first. Check your close before letting people back into GP to do work. And Microsoft actually recommends a second after backup and archive. We haven't found that absolutely necessary, but if you'd like us to, we'd be more than willing to. And if there's any issues, restore the backup and try again, maybe in a test company. Do not use the reverse historical year after a failed close. That's super important. We've had clients that have tried to do that, and it doesn't work. It's all buggered up. All right, any questions on that? Because we're going to talk about one of those most important steps, which is our posting types. So I'm just going to cycle back, make sure no one has any questions. I don't see any chats. I don't see any requests. Reacts. Beautiful. Okay. Posting type smart list. So everyone is familiar with the smart list for accounts here. Oops, let me get out of this one. So if I go under financial here and I go to accounts, you can sort of cross your two smart lists. So the first one is you do main account is less than wherever your cutoff is, and your posting type is equal to profit and loss. So you can come up here to your columns, make that columns on here and do those searches. That will show you anything that's a profit and loss, but in a low number, and then do the reverse. Main account is greater than, and your posting type is equal to balance sheet. That's just a quick way to double check that all your accounts are set up correctly. If you've got a really large chart of accounts, if you've got a really small chart of accounts, I tend to just put the main segment on here and sort it. Columns, add. And if your main segment's not set up right, let us know. We can fix that. Your main segment should be. So I tend to just sort by main segment and just scroll down and make sure that we don't have like a profit and loss right here in the middle. I think my company's set up pretty well. Yeah, so it goes balance sheet, and then right here it switches to profit and loss. Oh yeah, look, haha, balance sheet account. That was set up wrong. So had I done that smart list, those couple ones here that would pile up. So if I close this right now, this one would get a beginning balance. Might not be what you want. So super important. The way to fix that is actually to reverse the close and close it again after you've fixed the accounts, not before you fix the accounts. All right. Any questions on that before we move on? All right. Looks good. All right. So the year-end closing screen, it does have a progress bar. Yay! That was new a few years ago. It should bring in your retained earnings account from your setup. If you have, most of the time, I strongly recommend people maintain unused segment numbers and maintain inactive accounts and all inactive accounts, but that's really up to you. Um, I don't like to have the system remove things. That's my personal preference on here. I don't like to reset the journal entry number. I like to let it just keep rolling, but some clients do. And there's our new reverse close history. And we always make a recommendation, don't hit close twice. So for some clients, this goes really fast and they didn't realize they closed it and they hit close again. The only thing that changes is the year changes. So just be super careful that you don't screw that up because yes, it's happened lots of times. All right, moving on here. It's a super simple process when it goes right. And so after you close, check it. Was there any errors? Is your retained earnings entry correct? Does your trial balance total to zero? And Microsoft actually recommends running financial reports before and after. We've always found that slightly overkill, but that's again up to you. And now I would strongly suggest closing your fiscal periods. So go into your fiscal period setup here and make sure that year that you just closed are actually closed for postings. Because remember, you can post one closed year, but you probably don't want people routinely making changes to that. You want to make it change only if you have to. So I would strongly recommend coming in here and just hitting close all so that all of your days are closed. Okay. Yep. That wasn't what I want to do. Well, we'll just leave that one alone. All right. We are done with talking about year-end closes. We're going to move on to everyone's favorite 1099s. Any questions before I get into 1099s? Kathy, do you want to put your question in the chat? There's a chat or a questions area. All right, we'll cycle back. In the webinar format, we can't turn on mics, so you've got to put your questions in the questions or the chat area. Beautiful. All right, we'll talk about 1099s and we'll see if there's questions typed in just a minute. All right, so 1099s. They are printed under purchasing routines, print 1099. So the printer icon here is an edit list, and this prints our forms. And we can get you a smart list so that you can see the data ahead of time. E-filing. This is the last year that you can do any copies that are not e-filed. I think the cutoff is 10. So if you have less than 10 1099s, you can still not e-file. Next year, you'll have to e-file. GP is not going to be adding an e-file. There are several third-party solutions. Some of them are quite affordable. Support can assist you with building a smart list for data to put to one of these third-party solutions. But whatever you do, do not use the smart list under vendors, vendor address, or payable transactions. That will be the wrong data. That will be that year-to-date data that we talked about at the year-end close that is wrong. Okay? We have a blog post. We'll make sure you have this link. I'm actually going to throw it in the chat because this blog post goes into details on exactly how to go about options for electronic filing, what the cutoffs are, and all of that data. That blog post also includes this lovely chart of all the 1099 changes. So depending on what version of GP is whether you have support for the separate 1099 NEC. So if you're on GP 23.3 or above, you will have the separate 1099 NEC. Hopefully you are, because these are unsupported versions at this point. But if you are on these two versions, so 28.3 or 28.4, your year is not printing on the form, even though the form no longer has a pre-printed year. We do have a fix for this. Just contact support. You will have to get it again this year because we actually typed it on the form last year because there was no way to get that data from GP. So you'll have to get an updated version for this year. And you will need pre-printed forms. If you're on 28.5, which came out last year, you have the year on the form already. You have the separate NEC, and you can use blank paper for your NECs, but you'll have to buy pre-printed forms for your regular 1099s. If you have upgraded this year, you're on GP 18.6 in the last couple of weeks or month, you now can print all of your 1099s on blank paper, okay? We can help you with the year printing on the form. We can help you with the separate NECs. We've helped in the past years for the workarounds, but you will still have to buy those paper forms. If you're not on the versions, we can't help with that. Fortunately, those codes aren't supportable backwards. Those aren't backwards compatible, okay? If you are using pre-printed forms, you purchase them from Office Supply Company, Office Max, Office Depot, whomever else you want to go to. Check your alignment. So when you print to a pre-printed form, you actually get this extra button on your print options. This is where you normally select your printer, and it allows this alignment up or down, and you can use negatives. So check your alignment and use these horizontal verticals up or down to make it match. And most people are not using the 1096s, but if you do need 1096s, obviously to pre-print them, you're going to need to be on the most recent form. But you can always print the old ones and check the boxes. And remember with 1099s, you have to use the update information windows to get it to update correctly. You can't just go to the vendor card and update it. It's a question we get a lot of: why is this vendor giving me 1099 or not giving me 1099 data? Using this update information or even the edit information is super important to make the changes if a vendor was not set up correctly, because each document grabs what's set up at that moment, okay? Again, support can help you with these problems. This is something that they do a lot of with 1099 assistance in January. They spend a ton of time in January helping with 1099s. Alrighty, that is the end of 1099s. If you would like to read the knowledge-based articles from Microsoft that I referred to, these are all of the links. We'll make sure you have them. This is the most important. This is the fixed assets. Oops, didn't mean to move that. So if you use fixed assets, we want you to make sure that you follow that knowledge-based article. I will put that one in the chat also. Fixed assets. And if you just follow these links, it will take you to, come on, Control Shift, there we go. It's protecting me from myself. It takes you out to the Learn Microsoft and goes through the year-end closing procedures. If you've read these from Microsoft, they go on for a very long time. We strongly recommend you follow the one for fixed assets. We do not follow the procedures in the other modules. For example, if we go to the Payables one, as I mentioned earlier, it basically has printing 1099s as part of what you need to do before you close. You can see that right here. It says print the 1099s and then close your year. And again, there's no reason to do that. I don't know why Microsoft has not updated their recommendations. But they're here if you want to read what Microsoft recommends, and you can see why. But again, we've made these recommendations for years, and there's been no issues with our clients, and we support you doing it this method. All right, now we have time for general questions. So if you have questions, again, we can't unmute microphones, so raising your hand is not particularly useful. But if you go to the questions or the chat, we will get a copy of the recording and a copy of the PowerPoint. Yes, Elise will publish it as part of this, and if you want to email support, they can also send you a copy. And the recording, Elise, you're going to send out a link to that, right? You always do that. Yes. Thumbs up. Yes, she will send out a copy of the recording to everyone. I think it's generally a private YouTube post. All right. And remember, we're here to help. We have Break Fix Assistant from Monday and Friday, Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5 p.m. at support@ICS-Cloud Solutions. But also, if you know you're going to close or you want help for year-end closing, schedule it. It's always best if you know you're going to do it ahead, schedule it ahead. That way we make sure we have resources allocated, because, you know, everyone and their brother wants to do their 1099s that last day of January, and there's only so many people to go around. So our team can help you with your closes, your 1099s. We can verify that you've got disk space. We can walk you through steps. We can close it on the server, which is faster than on your desktop, and assist with any sort of troubleshooting. So feel free to send us appointments and send emails into support. Most of the appointments are during business hours between 8 and or 3, but there is limited night and weekend appointments for our night and weekend hours. All right. One final slide is thank you for watching. Make sure that you have signed up for our newsletters. We are trying to have new sets of newsletters where we have focused attention on questions. So I will send that. We have 3 newsletters. We have one about core accounting where we talk about financial and those sort of close things, one where we talk about distribution, and one for more of our techie IT people. So feel free to sign up for that. I'm going to hang out for another minute for any questions in the chat or anything else, but feel free. Otherwise, thanks for joining us on this early holiday presentation. Thanks, Lise. Lise likes to give me applause.